Hello and welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I am your host, Trent Clark, CEO of Leadershipity. I am a serial entrepreneur, an EO member, and with a fellow member today, I am the incoming president of EO West Michigan, a serial entrepreneur to the tune of like 14 different companies I've started. But in addition to the author of Leading Winning Teams over here, most people probably know me because I spent over 13 years in professional baseball coaching in 3 World Series. And on this episode of Winners Find a Way, I welcome my friend from Denver, Colorado, Travis Luther. What's up, buddy?
Thanks, Trent. Thanks for having me.
Travis, I'm super pumped up. I'm also a former president of EO Colorado.
That's right.
So this is a 5-time entrepreneur, 2-time exited entrepreneur who's got a great background in research and writing. Travis, you're a Washington State guy, but have spent most of your life in the Denver, Colorado area. Is that fair?
Yeah, by this time, Denver's the place I've lived the longest. Yeah, no doubt.
That's awesome. And you got to love Denver, man. It's such a great city. I was there just a short bit ago last fall and always love the visit. Great people. You can't beat the Rockies, right? I mean, come on, man.
Well, I think it depends on if you're talking about baseball or not, because I think everybody can beat the
Uh,
Rockies if you're talking about baseball.
yeah, actually, I think my little league, my 14U team might beat the Rockies.
They might beat the Rockies, and it might put
That's
some butts in the seats to watch the Little League team
yeah,
play the
yeah,
Rockies.
yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid they're going to put Pottstown, the
Mhm.
Pottstown Little League,
Yep.
superstars up against the Rockies and actually dominate them. I'm in
Oh
fear.
my gosh.
That's not fair to the Rockies. They're a club going through some things. Obviously, I coached with Bud Black for a long time, and I
Mm.
know he's been in the Rockies organization a while. And but yeah, man, I mean, an EO member now as an entrepreneur jumping into that organization, over 12 years ago, almost 13, as an accelerator. Looking to like, hey man, I got to advance my business. I got to grow this. You got a degree in sociology. My assumption is like you're not thinking like, hey man, I'm ready to take on every business. Like I'm a shark in a suit, like to walk me through what was going through at that time.
Well, my move to Denver was largely because I had tried being an entrepreneur earlier in my life. I'd had a couple coffee shops and a skateboard shop, and all of those were miserable failures. And I didn't really appreciate what I had learned going through those failures. I think a lot of people, I was just at a conference last week actually of college students, and I was on a panel, and I remember one of the other panel members saying, "Hey, when we break off and these entrepreneurs go sit at your table, make sure to ask them about their failures just as much as you ask them about their successes and their business advice." And that was very true. So yeah, I came to Denver at a time when I really thought I was a failure, and I had been convinced by people that were close to me who were caring and well-meaning, but had said, "Hey, maybe you don't have what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Maybe you should think about going to college and getting a job like everybody else." And so that's really why I came to Denver in the first place, was to tuck my tail between my legs and see what I might be interested in as far as some kind of corporate job goes. And
Yeah.
but it was in that experience of going back to college that I took some sociology courses just to finish, and really fell in love with the subject. And when I had finished my bachelor's, even though by this time now my businesses are really starting to take off, I returned to entrepreneurship, ironically, had a lot of success, still finished my degree. But when I finished my bachelor's degree, did not feel like I was done. And so applied to grad school and eventually got a master's, even started a PhD for a second, but decided to focus on business.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I know one of those early companies in Colorado was Lawfather,
Hmm.
and that's great brand and a cool name, right? And
Yeah.
it's so funny because as you look at the book over here, like man, you want to talk about failures, like jump in, man, like because they're when someone hears like, oh, I've started 14 companies, I'm like, oh, that wasn't successful 14 deals, right? Like
Right.
I had a couple wins. Like I had like sold 16 franchises of 1-800 Got Junk. Like I owned all of Arizona
Hmm.
and I had a good win there. And I had a good shipping company that I got a good win out of. And I had a good leadership company that I got a good win out of. And now I help a bunch of other companies with Bloom Growth and help them get aligned very fast. And, all the learning, Travis, for those companies to pass on was all my failures, right? It's
Yeah.
just all my failures.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's kind of There's a great quote, and I keep trying to figure out who said it. I thought it was Jim Collins, maybe in Good to Great, but it's, if you want to double your successes, triple your failures. And it's really true.
Yeah. Yeah. I love Brian Scudamore, actually, the former president and CEO of 1-800 Got Junk. He started 4 franchise order groups, and he wrote a great book, WTF, right? Willing to Fail.
Yeah.
And we just talk about that all the time, like, and I come from a baseball environment, right? And
hmm
and so failure is like 70% of the time, and you're a
That's right.
superstar, right? Like,
hmm
so you only get paid like 12 million for that, right? Like,
That's
so
right.
it's not bad. Like, you can really get used to the failure. And it's so conversely opposite of our school system, right? It's like, oh my gosh, if you only got 70% right on the test, you're like, oh, you're kind of average or below average. You're kind of a
Mm-hmm.
CD guy,
Mm-hmm.
and like you're not clearly one of the smart ones. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey man, I got 2/3. I got better than 2/3, right?
Right.
And so it's pretty wild. But I mean, you've had some challenges. You through your education and through your experience now. I mean, you have this great workshop of trauma and entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to talk a lot about your workshop of what we learn when we learn we are dying, the life advice from the terminally ill, which I'm super excited to get into that, because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we see movies about this stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you actually dove in and did the work, which is super interesting. And let me ask you a quick question about like family. I mean, you've been
Mm-hmm.
through this entrepreneurial journey for a while.
Yeah.
You got these 2 boys, 18, 16. Are you telling them, hey boys, you need to buy a company, you need to get out there and get it? Are you like telling them like, hey man, this is a route you should choose? Do they want it?
So, I mean, it's funny. You're a baseball guy. I'm a baseball guy. I was coach to my son for 8 years. So my older son is a baseball player. He's got a scholarship. He's going to go play at JUCO in Seattle,
Right.
and both of them have always had dreams, right? And their dreams have not been in entrepreneurship per se, but I think they've looked at the lessons that I've provided as an entrepreneur, including getting comfortable with risk and failure, and applied it to the things that they want. But I think the big lesson that comes out of our family as entrepreneurs is to dream big, and pursue those dreams, right? And so that's a little different than other families that we know, where it is more like, hey, buckle down, good grades, go to college, find a job, and not be so
Yeah.
risky,
Yeah.
which are things I think you can do after sports or after baseball. My youngest son is also an extremely talented mountain biker and skier, and he can probably go to college on scholarships for that. So that's more of like the attitude of being willing to take risks and do what you love, I think, is what they have, and not so much like to start the business. But the conversations we have around that is also, I'm continuing to work on my entrepreneurial pursuits, and I would love it if you guys ever decide that's something you want to be involved in, to come back to me and maybe become a part of the family business. I would love that.
Yeah, it's not an easy journey, and I think they probably saw that with you, right? Like that, being a member of the entrepreneurs organization is a great perk for families, because they get exposure
Mm-hmm.
into a lot of different people, a lot of different successful businesses, um, and a lot of different viewpoints from both socioeconomic and cultural and everything else. And I think it's such a valued education. I can't put a price on that, right?
Yeah.
I think there's something there that, and I haven't really told my kids like, hey, this is what you need to do. Like, I've never told my kids that. In fact, a lot of people get it on me because I have 4 boys, and they're all pretty high level hockey players.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, so none of your kids wanted to play baseball? I'm like, it's hard to be the baseball guy's kid, like, and
Yeah.
follow in dad's footsteps, and like, I want, like, let create your own path. Like, I don't care what you do. I love the mountain biking and skiing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Yep.
Like, such a fun venue, and such a different atmosphere in the sport. And I love the sport because everyone in those sports really warrants the effort that other people make. I think there's like more sportsmanship in those sports often than in the team sports. Have you seen that?
Mm. I have found there's like, I guess what I would say is I see less head-to-head competition in those sports, in which like my younger son, you might call it a team, but it feels more like a community, right? And everybody is like supporting each other and
Yeah.
encouraging each other to go faster and do better and get more technical. Whereas in baseball, I see it as more head-to-head competition where more players feel like they're competing with each other for spots. And so maybe that has something to do with you are competing for with somebody for
Yeah,
spot.
yeah.
And baseball, as you know, is a long road. I mean, you get to the
Oh,
minors, then you got 3 teams you're competing for spots, and then the majors. Whereas, in biking and skiing, it's still largely individual. So you do the best you can, and that's what you hang your hat on. And there's not anybody ahead of you or behind you kind of like nipping at your heels. It's just like, what can you do? So maybe that's what fosters the more community aspect of those teams versus the head-to-head combat of, trying to get a spot on a baseball team.
well, I like the values and the learnings of both, right? I really like the
Yeah.
idea that getting involved in a team sport, but I encourage a lot of parents from the big three, basketball, football, baseball, that hey, get your child in an individual sport like competing in skiing or wrestling or shooting or biking or running, swimming, tennis.
Hmm.
Man, because you learn in those individual sports responsibility. Like you don't
Hmm.
go like, hey, you know what? It was Travis's fault. Like, I did my job and I hit like 3 for 4, but Travis didn't throw strikes, so that's why we lost. Like, and I think there's this idea of like blame, and you may be able to skirt your response. Man, when it's an individual sport, like the whole thing turns right back around on
Hmm.
you. And it's
Hmm.
like, man, you got to own your practice time, your preparation. I think there's a higher level of individual learning and self-awareness that come from the individual sports.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But like you said, there's also a lot of value that comes from being on a team, especially a losing team, and finding out who you are and how you're going to get through that. Like our
Yeah.
like our poor Rockies at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, they got to figure this stuff out, right? It's not easy. All right, so I'm kind of excited to get into, both your kind of workshops and talk a little bit about that. Before we do that, one thing is let's talk about a little offer because you have a midlife alignment workshop,
Hmm.
kind of doing that second half of your life better. Tell them a little bit about where they can find out about that. Where is that at? Is that on your site?
Yeah, if you go to my website, travisluther.com, you'll find a menu option there, workshops, and then you can see what workshops I'm offering. On the website, it allows people individually to sign up to be part of a group for an online workshop. And then I also offer in-person workshops for, businesses or organizations who want to do stuff with their team.
Well, you look way too young to have an 18-year-old. So, like, I was trying to figure out what that is. And now I'm thinking about, what most people don't know about Travis Luther is like Travis is a former rock star, right?
Yeah.
Just followed up in the Seattle grunge, part of Ultra Find, the
Yeah.
band. And, you can find him out there on Spotify and check him out. And it's pretty cool. But I love the idea of, that it doesn't keep you young, like always learning, going on the road, the next show, you're only as good as your last show, all the things that you do, kind of coming up and learning that way. What did you get out of that?
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about sport, I mean, ironically, being a professional musician is a lot like that, right? You're on a team, you have to practice individually, right? And then you have to practice as a team, and then you have to go out as a team and do your job, which is, tour the country, play shows, sell merch, get people excited, get them signed up for your email list and stuff. But I think the one thing that's lost, and the question that's always funny is, people are like, oh man, that must have been awesome, girls and drugs and all this stuff. And I always have to kind of burst their bubble a little bit, because I say, when you are a professional musician, right? Like, it's a job. I know everyone knows Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue,
Yeah.
and they think that's what the life is like.
Yeah.
Maybe you can do that when you finally have enough money to have a private plane and all of that. But when you're in a van or a bus and you're on the road and you're driving 12, 14 hours a day, the number one priority is your health. It's not drugs and parties and all that stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we avoid getting sick? Because if we get sick, if we get
Yeah.
sick and tired while we're on this thing, the rest of the tour is going to be miserable and we're not going to be able to perform. And so That's kind of the surprise that people hear when I talk about life on the road. Like, there's definitely some fun things, but it's a job like anything else.
I think people miss that, right? Like, you're a four-member band, whatever it is. Like, can
Hmm.
you imagine a four-member band without a lead singer because they're sick,
Yeah.
without the drummer tonight? You got no
Yeah.
rhythm. You got no
Yep.
rhythm, man. You're just like,
Yep.
oh, I think we're just gonna go this. We're gonna play off the lead guitar, and maybe we'll be
Yep.
able to, it's like, wow, like the whole thing would be different. Clearly not the way. And it's not just like, oh, hey, we need a stand-in for our songs, on the road. We're not a cover band.
Right.
So there's a lot of challenges in that, and so I really appreciate that. And it's funny because Brent Pinvidic's a good friend, Hollywood exec, and he has a great story about this. And I saw this in baseball too.
Hmm.
When we'd be in the clubhouse and we'd have bands that are coming in that are going to do like the national anthem or like a rock show at the end of the game. And we'd be hanging out in the weight room, and they're all in the corner, like, oh my gosh, I wish I was Ken Griffey Jr. And I got, and you got Junior and his boys going, oh my gosh, can you imagine their life as a rock star? That would be just, wait, you want my life? My life sucks. I got to play
Yeah.
300, 162 games a year, and like, you want my life? I'm on the road 310 days. Like,
Yeah.
and they're like, wait a minute, I want your life, and you want my life, and so it's just funny. It's funny how we look at it and go, man, that's the life.
And that's why I think it's important to have a practice of being present, right? Because like those are both two very busy careers. And a lot of the time, and this kind of speaks to my work with the dying, a lot of the time we think about the future as that's the time we're going to get the reward, right? We're going to have our career, we're going to play our season, or we're going to do our tour. And then once that's done, we'll relax and reap the benefits of what we did, only to find out you're about to just go do it over again. Right. And so like, if you can't find a way to enjoy yourself in the moment, you really lose that, what's it all for kind of reason that keeps you motivated and keeps you going. And so it's nice to stop every once in a while and look down at the crowd and just realize how fortunate you are, to be at the plate or at the microphone or whatever the case may be, and take some time to enjoy it in the moment.
Yeah, I think that that gratitude, right, is a big part of people have figured out that happiness doesn't really come without that feeling of gratitude, that recognition. And one of the things as we get into this terminally ill, and what we learn when we learn we are dying, these um, life advice from the terminally ill. I always think about how it's so easy to complain. It's so easy to get down in a dander on one thing, and I've been guilty of this, right? Overreaction to a thing and not being present for sure. And man, I've just recently, kind of in the last couple of years, recognized that it's so good. This life, Travis, is so good that the moment it's so recognizable that we're like, oh my gosh, could you believe this? Like, how long have we been at this light? We've had to wait 3 reps on this light to get through. Not the fact that I'm driving an electric car that's driving itself. Like, like, what am I complaining about? Like, this is crazy. Like, and there's this recognition of the moment. We put this ultra focus on it when it's like, man, 99.99% of your day was unbelievable and probably like the best day ever.
Yeah.
And yet this little fraction gets us bent sideways to where we can't recover. Have you seen this?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and especially in these times where the people's feelings and beliefs about the world are largely dictated by the news and not their own personal experience, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I always ask people is, what is your personal experience like? Can you ask yourself, what is your physical experience like day to day? Because if you watch the news, you think everyone's out to get you, that a shark is going to attack you, that Iran's going to drop a bomb on you, that like an immigrant is going to rob and rape you. And I say, what is your experience, right? Like, what is your experience of people? And in my experience is that almost every human I've ever met is kind, has my best interests at heart, wants their kids to be safe and healthy. and doesn't cause trouble, you know,
Yeah.
and the pain and anxiety we feel are from fictions that we see on TV and not necessarily what happens to us. That's not to say bad things don't happen to people, but just to your point, it is such a rarity that when we have this interruption to our lives, we fixate on the fact, that somebody cut us off, or that our meal was cold, or that someone charged us the wrong price for a latte. And that's enough to flip us upside down. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a symptom of how good we have it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I saw a great meme the other day, and you're not as old as I am yet, Travis. So, but I think you'll appreciate it. Like growing up, I'm a '60s baby, so I grew up in the '70s, really,
Mm-hmm.
and early '80s. And and I saw this meme says, "Yeah, I grew up in the early '70s, so we all thought we were gonna die from quicksand."
Yeah.
It was like every show had like quicksand. It was like Gilligan's Island. And all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, I hit the quicksand. Like it was like in your neighborhood or something. Like
Yep.
I've never seen quicksand in my entire life.
Yep.
And like it was like 4 out of 5 shows had an episode about quicksand and someone stuck,
Yep.
and it was
Yep.
like,
Well,
wow,
and
did that
I was
ever
the
really actually
80s.
happen?
I was the 80s, and it was volcanoes, or after Mount St. Helens, it was like everybody practice getting under your desk in case a volcano blows up.
Yeah.
It's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And at the time, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, this makes sense. And now you're like, what
Yeah.
the heck are we even talking
Yeah.
about?
Seattle will be the next Pompeii.
That's right.
Like, what do we hear?
That's right.
Is that a realistic option? Because we actually know how to evacuate people. Like, we are not going to get covered by this thing. Like, it's so crazy, like, to think what we're led to believe and the fears we had, right? These were these were legitimate fears.
Yeah.
That, hey, this could happen,
Right.
and yeah, it's a very different deal. So let's get into this a little bit. Like, first of all, let's talk about the framework of why, right? Like this is a near and dear subject of, man, probably the most authentic and vulnerable conversation you will ever have. We have a lot of those in EO. We get conditioned for it because we have a lot of them.
Yeah.
And man, I would think a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, I would be absolutely in fear of having a conversation with someone who was terminally ill. I would screw it up. I'd say the wrong things. I wouldn't be sensitive to them. There's a lot of things here or there. And by the way, death scares a ton of people.
Yeah.
Even though we're all moving towards it, right?
Yeah.
We're all moving towards it, like even at this moment,
Yep.
And so it scares a lot of people, in fairness, right? And so how did you decide, like, man, this is a project I really want to tackle? How did this land and Travis Luther take on this project and develop this workshop?
I think it's like a 3-prong conversion of some things that happened in my life. Early on, my father was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and he had developed cirrhosis of the liver, became terminally ill, wasn't able to do what he needed to do to be eligible for a liver transplant, and lived the last year of his life in hospice. And so as a teenager, even though he would try and engage me, I would largely ignore him because I was so mad about what was going on and this belief I had that he chose, drugs and alcohol over his family. And so I missed an opportunity to ask him what it was like to face his own mortality, what kind of lessons he might have for me to make my life better. And I really started to recognize that regret as I became a father myself.
Yeah.
And just reflected on how many times I had this gut instinct to go to my father or a male figure per se to get advice I felt like I couldn't get from anyone else, and I didn't have that. So in the back of my mind, I knew that was a regret I had personally, and a wound I thought I would probably never be able to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I moved to Denver, like you said, I started this company called Lawfather, and a lot of what I did over the last 10 years at Lawfather was I consulted with attorneys about how to create better trial presentations or how to get cases settled in mediation. And one of the things I did is I interviewed victims of catastrophic injuries, so paraplegics, quadriplegics, people with brain injuries. I interviewed family members of people who were in comas or family members of people who had died. And so, over this 10 or 15-year period, I got very comfortable asking people more and more intimate questions, because my job as a consultant was to really tell a story about what these injury victims' lives looked like, and all of the consequences of their injuries, whether that was a mechanical injury at work or a car accident, or um, falling, or a building falling on them, or explosions or fires, or being in plane crashes or helicopter crashes. I mean, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people who were really going through some tough stuff, and I kind of learned how to ask questions that really told their story in a pretty authentic way. And then the third prong of that is that my good friend George Morris, who was also a former president of EO Colorado, got a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. And so he was a friend of mine. He was a mentor of mine. I remember when I was an accelerator, he had introduced me to some other EO members and said, "This is Travis Luther. He's going to be president of this chapter someday," which was not anything I had articulated to him, but he was really supportive of me when I entered EO. He put me in some leadership positions and asked me to execute some initiatives he was passionate about. And so when he got sick, he and I started talking. And one thing we had in common in our backgrounds is that we had both lost our fathers as teenagers. And so I had told him about this idea I had been kicking around for the last couple of years, maybe to interview people with terminal illness, gather their last bits of wisdom and advice, and kind of consolidate those into some life lessons, twofold. One, because I thought that might help with my own healing, and my own regret of having not engaged in my father, and that maybe I could get some advice from those people on how to live a better life myself. And two, if I could distill those interviews into some life lessons, I might be able to help other people live a better life as well, if they could get refocused on what was important. And I thought that in entrepreneurship and as a member of EO, that was especially interesting and important, because you and I both, and we see the stress of entrepreneurship. We see how it kind of changes people's priorities, how you get lost in your business, you lose yourself, your family's frustrated. And a lot of times we just need an opportunity to reset and reprioritize. And I thought, I think I might be able to help do that by pursuing this research project.
Love it. Yeah, I love that, man. I mean, that's prophetic, by the way, of George, that he knew, like, hey, maybe one day you will be, and planted that seed.
Yeah. And actually, I said, "Do you think it's too morbid, or self-serving?" And he said, "No, I think it's a fantastic idea, and I want to be your first interview." And so away we went.
I love it. I love it. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about how many people did you actually go out, spend the time with? What's the average interview like? Is this 20 minutes? Is this
Mm-hmm.
2.5 hours? Is this 2 days? Like, are you Tuesday with Maury?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, like,
So I usually ask people to book an hour, and then we always went more. I would say the average interview would go 2 hours. One of the things that people told me, and I think the reason that people went longer, was they said that talking about this stuff that they talked about with me wasn't something they really wanted to talk about with their family members, because they felt like this acknowledgement of their impending death was a concession to the disease, and that they were going to give the impression that they weren't willing to fight, or that fighting off the disease or continuing with chemo wasn't worth it, and that might imply that they didn't think being with their families was worth it and stuff. So I really got to hear a lot of what had been built up inside these folks over the course of their treatment and diagnosis, that they just weren't comfortable sharing with their family, but they wanted a record of it, and they wanted people to know. I would say, I don't know, I interviewed 2 or 3 dozen people with terminal illness. Not everybody was a good fit for the podcast or the recordings or the book. Some people had a lot of insightful things to say. They just didn't present well, or they were pretty ill. And I didn't feel like it would be appropriate to kind of put them online, if you will. Other people were a lot more self-reflective. It felt like they had really organized some ideas. And so I probably got a dozen podcast episodes that I'm going to release from my interviews. And then I continue to interview people today. So anytime someone tells me a story or sends me a referral and I get a chance to talk to somebody that I think would be a good fit for the study, I include them.
awesome.
So it's kind of an ongoing thing.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a second before we're going to jump into the trauma of entrepreneurship too. But I want to give you a second to think about this, because when someone walks into your workshop, they're in one place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's they're in their current reality. And like you've talked about, we see our future reality as something else. Like the day we sell the business, the day we get our kids through college, the day we, get our dream job, like whatever it is, right? We've
Yeah.
got that future reality. Like when you would say someone comes into your workshop, they have a current reality,
Yep.
and then what do you provide for them as a go forward in their future reality that you get? And then what are the big three things inside that they do in the workshop that will get them there?
Yeah, this is really easy. I mean, you've set this up perfectly. So the realization that people have, right? So here's one of the big things that comes out of the interviews that we apply to the workshop, and that is the degree to which people postpone all of the things they think they're working for. Right?
Mm,
We come to work, whether we're entrepreneurs or baseball players or whatever it is, we work really hard, and you say, well, what are you working for? And the answer is almost exclusively something in the future, right? Not anything for today. And then we take for granted this idea that we even have this future or that it's promised to us. So what we do is we largely postpone all of the rewards that we're sacrificing so much of our life for this unguaranteed future. Right. So I make that obvious through the interviews and the reflections. Is like, one, I'm not interviewing people who are in their 90s. I'm interviewing our contemporaries, people in their 40s and their 50s, and usually not many people above 50. Right. And so you're seeing like these are our contemporaries. These are our friends, our community, and they're not getting that second half. And they had done the same thing that you're doing. They've postponed everything, and now they're living with this anxiety and regret about not having done the things that they wanted to do.
mm,
The big self-examination here is you talked about you have this, everyone comes into the workshop and has this realization. They have the realization of their lived and unlived life. And what I mean by that is the lived life is what you talked about in the first part of your question. Everything they're doing right now, all the activity of their day, whether it's their family, their business, their personal life, spirituality, whatever it is. And then they have their unlived life, right? And that's who they thought they were going to be at this point in their life.
yeah.
Right? What did they think they were going to be doing? What were their passions? Right? And this is a big aha moment for me. And part of the reason I sold my companies is because I get this notification for LinkedIn that, oh, congratulations on your 18-year work anniversary. And I go, shucks, man, 18 years ago, if you had asked, 25-year-old Travis, like, is this what he was going to be doing? I would have told you no, because I enjoyed my businesses and in my life, and it brought me a lot of money and freedom for our family and stuff. But it never was exactly what I had in mind for myself. And so when people come to the workshop, we say, what is it that you had in mind for yourself? What is the life you're living now? And what is the distance between that lived and unlived life? And is the greater that distance marked by more unhappiness, less fulfillment, more anxiety, more postponement? And what can we do to unify these two lives, this lived and unlived life, so that they're a single life on the path that you always had in mind for yourself? And that's the crux of the workshop, because as we go through the reflections of the dying, again, I won't give them all away, but we learn about what is really important in life, what matters at the end of your life, how living a better life gives you less anxiety as you enter the end of your life, but also how to be more fulfilled in that second half of your life. And to remind people, especially coming into middle age, because you had asked me earlier, was there something about this work that also was beneficial to where I was in middle age, 16 and 18-year-old boys about to become an empty nester? So much transition in my own life was, there's also this belief like, man, I don't know if my best days are behind me too. I'm not a young man anymore. I don't have as much energy as I used to have. And so that is also a belief that's constant in people. They think, well, now that I'm at midlife, I'm stuck on the path, because what else am I going to do? And so we show you, no, your best days are not behind you. You're actually coming to a place where you have all your experience, all your wisdom, you have your education, you both professional and school of hard knocks, and you're actually in the best position of your life to determine your course and your future now than you ever have been before. So let's work on a plan for that.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that is super interesting to me, because I think we're all encouraged by Colonel Sanders, who starts Kentucky Fried Chicken at 76 years old or
Mm-hmm.
something, And we hear those stories that happens, and it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon as a second career. Things are actually great. And I think, I always point to, because I am a grandfather, right? I have a grandson, and man, it's like I see all the parenting issues now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't see them when I was doing them, but it's like it's so easy to be a grandparent. Like, oh, I've got the knowledge, I've got the experience,
Yep.
I know exactly about what's about to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's and it's like this gratifying position. And by the way, you're totally not responsible, right? Like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's like, you need to come pick him up. Like that's it. And so it's a very unique position, but and I also
Well,
think
also
that,
it's interesting what you're saying because if you think about learning in general, right? I've tried to teach my kids things. I'm sure you try and teach your kids things, and you realize that they're just not listening. And I know that I didn't listen, and there's so much that we have to learn by our own experience when those lessons are coming down on us from older people, right? We always think, oh, you don't know because you're not in my shoes and you don't know what the world is like now.
yeah,
And I think the powerful part of this work that I've done in the research that I'm doing is that, like I said, it is our contemporaries. And so when you go through this workshop and we watch these video clips of all the people that I've interviewed, and then you realize, oh, that person's my age, or that person feels exactly like I did, or they have a story very similar to mine, or a path very similar to mine. And then you realize that, oh, and they died. And everybody that's in this workshop, that's appearing in this workshop on video with me, is also dead. It hits home in a way that a parent telling you doesn't, because this is
yeah,
your contemporary, right? This is your contemporary telling you, Trent, listen to me when I tell you money's fake, or whatever the case may be,
yeah,
right?
right,
You hear these lessons and you're like, God, I have to take this to heart.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's what makes it more powerful than a lot of other workshops is we're not talking about advice from some abstract group. We're looking at people who are living through and eventually dying in basically our shoes.
A lot of the people, would you consider, like, and I'm using this in the example of like athletes, okay?
Hmm.
So in professional baseball, you like peak at like 31 years old. And the reason for that is that you're still physically very strong, have most of the same tools you had as a 20-year-old at 31 still. Yet now you've got 10 years of experience against
Hmm.
that competition, right? Like
Hmm.
you've got all the confidence because you've had all the preparation and now you've got all the reps. So the prep and reps equals a ton of confidence. And you're like, wow, this 31-year-old's amazing. And that's when these big contracts get in and they're like, yeah, till like 34, 35. Now you're seeing the longevity go because physically we can stay in it longer. That's
Hmm.
a big deal. But in our business side of entrepreneurship, I mean, like 45 is like the absolute sweet spot. You've had a business for 20
Hmm.
years, you're still healthy, you got the families, you're getting near that empty nester kind of
Yep.
range, and you're kind of in this spot. And then boom, you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to be the empty nester. We've saved it all for now. We're going to do the retirement travel. We're going to do the 3 months through Europe. And like, oh, no, that's not happening because you got 4 months.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
now it's like, whoa, the real reflection is crazy. So let's walk through maybe like, I know there's a lot of lessons that come out of this, right? And,
Hmm.
I'm not giving away the workshop here because it's awesome.
Hmm.
But talk about the few 4 or 5 principles that you learned along the way that really touched Travis Luther, and why.
Yeah. Stop pretending like you have forever. Right. It's I have a 38 tattoo on my arm right here that I got when my dad died, because my dad was 38 when he died. Well, actually, I got it a few years after he died because I wasn't old enough to get a tattoo.
Yeah.
But I knew that it was funny when that happened, a clock started in me in which I felt like I have to get to 38 and I need to accomplish a lot, because when I turn 38, I want to be able to say, yes, I could die happy, or I could die knowing what I was capable of, or having accomplished great things. And I think a lot of kids, unfortunately, who have parents who die kind of go through the same kind of time anxiety where you really feel like your days are numbered. It's almost like a curse, right? And because when you experience the death of a parent as a young person, it seems unreal, and it starts to create some anxiousness in you.
Yeah.
So I have always had this anxiousness, this like stop pretending like you have forever inside of me. And that's been a big catalyst for what I've been trying to convince other people of as part of this project. But again, I can't tell them as a person who lost their parent, but I have found a way to create that reality by having them listen to people who are our age and understand that that's a reality. So definitely this idea of postponing and asking yourself, why am I doing why I'm doing it? Oh, I'm doing it because I want to do all this stuff when I'm 60 or 70, when I'm no longer physically able to do it? Or should I start trying to figure out a way to incorporate the things that I want into my life now, so at least I can guarantee them today? That's a huge lesson coming out of the workshop.
I want to come back to that
Yeah.
lesson, especially from the entrepreneur and the sports side of things. But I immediately go to the song, like "Live Like You're Dying."
Yeah.
Right? Like it's
That
like,
would be my
man,
theme song.
yeah, like that's just it just hits you right there. It's like, man, am I really doing that? Like, I went 3.2 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
Like it's like, man, I don't see myself doing that. But you know what, man? Like if that's your gig, do that stuff, man. Like there's no tomorrow here. It's not promised, right?
Right.
So
Right.
like I love that. I love that feeling. Okay, that's a great lesson. What was number 2? What was another one?
Another one is love like you're leaving. And this has a lot of crossover over with my work in trauma and entrepreneurship, but about forgiveness too, right? Like loving like you're leaving means like just forgiving, living without fear, saying I love you more. Things I've adopted with my friends over the last couple of years. I tell all my guy friends on the phone after we, hey, love you, buddy. Talk to you later. Bye. Hug, love you. Like, I just don't take that for granted. I make sure that the people in my life who I love know it. And I extend a lot more love to a lot more people than I may have in the past, right? I've gotten rid of all the criteria that love is supposed to be, and just kind of walk out my door every morning being like, everybody is worth loving right now, and just kind of like living like that, which I think is a really, and reflective of what we talked about earlier about the difference between your actual lived experience in life and how you think you're being pursued by what you watch on the news, right?
Love it. Love like you're leaving. Okay, good.
Love like you are leaving. Yeah.
All right, next one.
Um, one of the regrets that came up over and over again is that people spent too much time in relationships that didn't serve them, and took too
Mhm,
much time to admit that either to themselves or the other people. And that included both romantic relationships and business relationships and friendships. But
mhm.
when people get to the end of their lives, they really have to ask themselves, what am I trading this time for? And what I mean by that is, I may ask them, can I interview you for an hour? And they have to ask themselves, what is that hour worth based on how much time I have left in my life?
Heck yeah.
And so what's left in their life gets a lot of examination, but also what they wasted in their life gets a lot of examination. And so many people talk about being in these relationships that didn't serve them or were not healthy, and being in them way too long, and talking about this idea of, I have traded too much of my life in the service of something or someone else that didn't have my best interests at heart, that didn't enrich my life.
And that could be anything, right? That could be taking care of an angered parent. That could
Mhm.
be working for a bad boss. That could be a certain love interest for sure.
I had a
But
doctor also talk about all the volunteer boards and stuff, just like weird status stuff that really didn't have any impact on his life and just took up a bunch of time, and he's like, if I could go back, I would not have served on all these boards. Like
yeah,
it didn't matter.
yeah,
But he thought he had to, because he thought, that's what you do when you're a doctor in the community. And, he's
hmm
like, I didn't have any impact. I just went to these meetings and did this stuff. And I just wish I hadn't done that.
yeah. That's powerful, man. That's powerful. All right, next one.
Well, we talked about closing the gap between your lived and unlived life. And I think the lesson or principle there is designing a life that feels like it's yours. Right. So I always say at the end of the day, like, what is this work about? And what this work is about for me is making people believe that they have a right to their lives, right? That they have a right to their individual freedom, and that they should design a life that feels authentic to them. And too much of the time, if you take a pie chart or whatever, and you say, of all the things that you're doing in a day and all the people that you're doing it for, how much of it is your choice and what you want for yourself? And quite often it's like 15%. and then that 15% isn't really enough time to dedicate to anything to be good at it or enjoy it. But I might run off and play tennis because I have, an hour to do that a week. But that's something I'd really like to be doing more of, or concentrating more on, or getting better at, and just not taking the time for the things that feel, rewarding to them personally.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've done in like EO, facilitating, because I facilitate a lot for mentorship and retreats and things like that, and doing the wheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 8 chambers of the wheel, and you realize like I'm like a 2 in this category. Like, holy cow, like holy gap in my life. Like it's like I'm not giving any time to this. There is zero balance in this wheel as I just
Mm-hmm.
basically either neglect or just don't make time for this thing in my life. And it's like, wow,
Yep.
That's going to come back and at some point go, how are you going to do this, right?
Yep.
So that's always a good exercise. Awesome. Let's bounce back a little bit with the remaining time, because I really want to talk about this trauma. In my book, I interviewed a great friend, a former EO member, and based out of Chicago, and he talks about like the trauma effect. Like, most entrepreneurs and people that accomplish kind of in that 1%, they've gone through bankruptcy, family trauma, losing a family member, or a divorce, or something significant
Yeah.
as kids. And I mean, I can see, just listening to your story, hearing your drive, of that impact of 38, like it's on your
Mm-hmm.
arm, like
Mm-hmm.
like it's like you got your own little sand through the hourglass, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like, hey, this thing's gonna come out on me, and I'm gonna hit this 38 number, and then who knows what's after that, but like nothing's promised after that. In fact, you and I both know now nothing was promised even up to there, right?
That's right.
like but you know um you have this symbol, and it's acting. You said catalyst. I said driver.
Mm-hmm.
It's a driver internally for young Travis. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, my upbringing was pretty tough. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 15. My dad was 17. By the time my mom was 19, she was a single mom of 3 boys. We left. Well, we were born in Los Angeles. We left California to go to rural Washington, where my mom thought maybe we could start this new life, and just kind of ended up living in rural poverty. And things didn't necessarily get better. They were just hard in a different way. And very the kind of the double-edged sword of poverty is that not only do you not have the resources that you need, money, college fund, all that stuff to thrive in a U.S. society, people also have this terrible stigma about you, right? That because you're poor, you're a threat, or you're going to steal, or you shouldn't hang around their kids, or you're going to be a bad influence. And so you also miss out on mentors and people that could really help you or teach you, in light of the fact that you don't have that at home. And so
by the way, that's a. Were you aware of that then, or do you see that now? Because looking back, you saw how all that was playing out in the moment.
I felt it, right?
I felt it.
I felt it. Like as a kid, I always was so anxious about money. I knew we were poor. I was always embarrassed about the status of my clothing and my house or not house and car. I mean, just, I just felt it. I got teased. People would tell me, I'd say, hey, can you come play? I'd be like in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, right? Hey, can you come play? No, my mom doesn't want me hanging out with you. Well, why? I don't know. She just said you're a bad kid, and it's just like, where the heck is all this coming from, right? And so as a kid, I felt it, but I couldn't articulate it as that. But that's why I really loved sociology so much when I stumbled upon it, was because it started to explain to me why I was always coming up to these dead ends in life. And like, my brothers, unfortunately, ended up in prison and didn't really thrive in the way I did. And one of the questions I wanted to answer is, why was I able to go one way and have success while my brothers with equal ferocity went another way into their criminal and drug enterprises? But why did I go the other way? And so as I entered into sociology, I started to understand some of the structural elements that were also dictating the path of our lives, and how unusual and exceptional it was that I was able to escape that. And then that was the question I wanted to answer, is why did I do that? How did I do that? What was my motivation? And that's why I continued on to grad school and continued doing research around social stratification and poverty and social stature, was because it just explained so much to me. And what it did in a weird way is it took this this deep sadness that I had, that I was a failed or bad person, and it kind of separated that feeling of personal responsibility to the structural responsibility, and made me see, oh God, I wasn't bad. Like, I just was in this weird place where it was going to be very hard for me to move up and thrive.
Yeah.
Having started to answer that, I wanted to know, why do so many people in my entrepreneurial community have similar backgrounds as mine? And why do so many people who have suffered chronic trauma as a young person go to entrepreneurship? Because it's like 75% of people, when I give my workshop or talk, and I raise your hand if you've had some kind of trauma in your background, it's about 3 out of 4 entrepreneurs, right? So it seems to attract people like me for some reason. And I also wanted to figure that out, because it served a lot of us well.
Yeah, and I mean, what if now that you've done all this research, you look back at that, like, what do you think the separator was between you and your brothers, having dealt with similar environment, like you said, a little bit different conditions based on timing and some other things there, younger, older, whatever's happening there. But what do you think today, looking back, was the difference maker?
Well, you can call it good luck or bad luck, but my bad luck was that I had to end up taking informal custody of my brothers. I moved out of my house completely when I was 2 weeks before my 16th birthday. And shortly after that, I took informal custody of my brothers. And so I was the oldest, and I became the provider, or the person that needed to be the provider. And so I had a lot of responsibility really young. And when I started looking at what my options were going to be to really bring wealth and success to my family, it became obvious to me it was going to be entrepreneurship, because I wasn't getting chances from other people. I wasn't getting mentorship for other people. And that's when I started taking chances and experimenting with stuff. That's when I had my coffee shops and my skateboard shop. These were my early attempts to try and figure out a way to carve out a business for myself so that I could generate an income that could support a family.
Yeah.
That is the big catalyst. I think if my brothers, like I said, they're both smart as I am and both as determined as I am, they just didn't have responsibility for anybody or anything.
Yeah, I mean, the word I was thinking was necessity. It wasn't an option. Like, this is a necessity. The little brothers are going to need food. I need food. We need shelter. If I got to take custody of this is going to be like, I could do the quick math and go, hey, if I don't make $2,200, someone's not going to eat, and we're not going to have a roof over our head, and we're not going to get anywhere we need to go.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a minimum, and $2,200 is a lot of money when you're 16 years old, man. Like,
and
that feels like, Fort Knox. Like, where am I going to get $2,200, man?
Yeah. And I was working like 2 full-time jobs to do that. I was lying about my age and working as much as I could, and then trying to figure out, like, well, how the hell are we going to go to college? How are we going to get cars? And just like, I have to do something big. Now, as a 16 or 17-year-old, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I probably should have just like kept working, right? But in my head, I was like, no, if we want these things, if we want a normal life, if we want the American dream, then I have to do something exceptional. I can't just clean hotel rooms or whatever I was doing. I have to figure out a way to do something exceptional. And to me, starting businesses was the thing that was going to at least give us that shot.
That's awesome. So let's talk about, let's face some of the folks that are facing what you faced, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's plenty of challenges out there today, and either in one of the two categories, they've lived this experience with somebody very close to them. They may be going through this experience themselves of a terminal illness, or they may be someone caught in that trauma, either been through it back there and can't overcome it, can't shake it, or they did that and they've overcome it, with maybe some other challenges behind that, which is, I'm not going to deal with it anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell somebody? What would you tell somebody today on those items?
That with some examination, it's easy to start to see that a lot of the failures or negativity in your life are not reflective of you as a person, right? You are not a personal failure. And that, again, I've mentioned it a little bit before, but that was something that took me a long time to understand, is the things that I did not do well or failed at did not mean that I was a failure as a person. And because I'd had failures and I'd had tough things happen to me in my life, I started having these stories in my head that I was a bad person, or that I was stupid, or that I wasn't worth investing in. And I couldn't ever separate the two. So that's kind of the first thing that we look at in the trauma workshop too, is how do we separate our activity failures from our failures as a person and realize they're not one and the same thing. The other thing is we look at structure too, because in trauma, a lot of what happens to us are what we call in sociology recursive relationships, meaning I'm a teen parent because my mom was a teen parent because her mom was a teen parent. Or I was a drug addict because my father was a drug addict because his dad was a drug addict, right? And this is some of the work that I've gone through. I talk about this in my trauma workshop. My dad actually had polio as a baby. He had a deformed leg. He had lots of surgeries. If I start the timeline of my life at the time I was born and I look at him as a father and I say, you were a drug addict and an alcoholic and you fricked up my life, right? You made things like really, really hard for me. That's a really easy place to start. And he's a very easy person to blame. If I expand that timeline out and I look at both my parents and I realize that my dad had an illness, he was an addict long before he was even an adult, right? He was on painkillers and stuff from all his surgeries, and that he didn't enter his 17th year of life determined to create a son whose life he could make miserable and tough. That takes a little bit of the sting out of it, and it allows me start to see my parents as people who at times were well-meaning, at times made mistakes, but weren't out to get me. And so again, it helps relieve this belief that I'm a bad person who people want to do bad things to, but start to see my life as just another piece in a very unfortunate pattern that also involved my parents or my grandparents. And so it allows for some forgiveness in that way, when you realize that the people around you who hurt you largely have been hurt themselves and have also been victims of some structure or recursive relationship that's also beat them down and wore them out.
Yeah. Well, I like the mindset of the forgiveness. I think addressing that, I've seen a lot of people dive into the victimhood and just
Mm-hmm.
stay there
Yeah.
for years, and
Yep.
just like, you know what, it's never going to be fair. Like, wait,
Yeah.
hold on, like it's a danger zone for me.
Yeah.
No matter the challenges aren't their fault. It doesn't matter. Like, moving past and through it is so important for me. So listen, Travis Luther,
Yeah.
so good to have you on today, man. If you go to travisluther.com, you can find out about all his workshops.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's the midlife alignment workshop. There's the what we learn when we learn we are dying workshop. There's the workshop of trauma for the entrepreneur, which is fabulous. And that's a whole nother gig. So can't wait to have you in West Michigan, because we're going to have you up here, I'm sure. So it's going to be an incredible experience. So Travis, thank you so much for joining us on Winners Find a Way. Last word?
Hey, if you want to double your successes, triple your failures.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like, and don't be afraid of that risk, man. Like, get back up. All right. For everybody else, join us every Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Pacific, on the Winners Find a Way show, live on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, Leadershipity channel, and my Facebook Live. And of course, you can watch the entire episode or listen to the episode on Spotify, all the major networks, on Friday mornings when we drop the full episode in all of your podcast networks every single Friday. So we thank today Travis Luther for joining us live from Denver, Colorado. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time. And winners find a way.